Hello again to my loyal and devoted fan base. I can only imagine that I published my last video and it got like 100,000 views, and now everybody's very excited for round 2. I am overjoyed to tell you that it is 2:54 in the morning and I have a bit of a cold, so I can't sleep. And there's only so many Headspace sleepcasts you can listen to before you give up. So I thought I would get up on a work night and sit down and share a little bit more of Our Journey Begins with you. The fire is roaring again. I'm actually looking at quality streets instead of ginger nuts, and I have saved a purple for you. So come and join me. 3 weeks before our journey begins. From the depths of the Stellarian palace's treasure room came the muffled but distinct sound of someone tripping over. Pissing boots, the someone thought. If only the stable boy could have been considerate enough to have dainty little feet, I wouldn't have to clomp around in these. She checked the fall hadn't raised any suspicions before stealing some thick brown twine from a paper package. The contents of the package fell open, but she ignored the stacks of coins sliding over each other and sparkling on the tiled floor. Instead, she wrapped the twine around her calves tightly, adhering the oversized boots firmly to her legs. Now, to business. The girl took out a leather satchel and began, methodically, to fill it with coins. This was no difficulty. The treasure room was full. Centuries' worth of wealth were piled haphazardly up against the walls and thick pillars. She looked at the heirlooms and jewels hungrily, but took care only to take currency. She didn't want to have to barter. A messily dislodged parcel sent a pile of treasure tumbling down into the room. Wincing, the girl let the noise subside. She spotted something in the debris. Ooh, good sword. She leaned forward and pulled it out from amongst the coins. The sword was nearly as big as her, and shone with a blue-green metal that seemed to shift in colour as she watched it. The curved blade had a pointed star and a moon cut into its edge, like barbs. It was beautiful, but old, and speckled rust crept from the handle upwards. The girl was holding the handle to her eye to inspect the strange orb inset to the hilt, when she heard a voice inside her head. Not a metaphorical voice, or an inner monologue, or even another person in the room. Something deeper than knowledge told the girl that this voice was coming from the sword. "Thief," it said, deeply and clearly. "Thief!" I don't know if you've ever seen a video of a cat when they realize there's a pickle behind them. If you haven't, then this will seem like a strange thing to say. But if you have, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the girl jumped like a cat who had just realized that there was a pickle behind them. "Oh, it talks. The fucking sword talks," she gibbered, crawling back to a safe distance. There was a pause. The sword seemed to be calculating. "You cannot have just heard me." "Oh, yeah? Well... This was discombobulating. The girl tried to prepare a comeback, but was still unused to the feeling of the voice in her head. It had no source. It came from everywhere and nowhere. "Well, why not?" because only royalty of the Cassiopeia bloodline can hear me. And you've crept in here in ill-fitting rogue's clothes, stuffing coins into a bag." The girl's eyes narrowed. "Can you move on your own? Are you going to hurt me?" "I cannot move on my own. I only move when carried or wielded. So you'd have to trip and fall onto me to get hurt." Satisfied, the girl stood over the sword and spoke. "It's no wonder I can hear you. My name is Lyra Cassiopeia, daughter to King Abraham Cassiopeia, heir to the Cassiopeia throne. And I'm dressed like this because I'm running away." "3 weeks before our journey begins, earlier that day. Untarnished daylight fell cleanly onto the floor of a large, high-ceilinged hall. The floors were of polished ash wood of a bluish-grey tint. The marbled walls, which were white, were shot through with thin black swirls, as if ink had been dropped into milk. One side of the hall was open. A series of high arches were carved into the marble, with a stone animal's head peering down from the peak of each curve. The view below was of the institution's large recreation ground, which was a uniform, pale concrete. Plants in pots dotted the ground and jutting balcony. The overall impression of the room was one of dazzling whiteness. Lined up against the walls of the hall were wooden stands, which held all the fencing and sword-fighting equipment you could imagine. Wooden swords stood next to rapiers and long swords. Padded defensive vests were piled to one side, along with gauntlets, helmets, and other protective gear. The clothing seemed to run from adult sizes down to something that might fit a young child. Final year students were practicing that morning. The messenger had come at a good time. There seemed to be no teacher present, but most of the boys were drilling the same movements. The messenger's eyes were drawn toward the end of the hall. Any boy who was at a loss for what to do was looking toward one student in particular for inspiration. Presently he was facing away, cutting wide circles upward in a rhythmic figure-of-8 motion. He seemed to be aware that he was leading the group, but took no notice, focusing on his own movements. As the teacher and messenger strolled around to his front, his face flashed with recognition and something like fear. He stopped his drill. "Mrs. Yolland, good morning." "Don't mind us, Drake," the teacher spoke. "Continue with your exercises." Drake nodded quietly and obliged, though his movements were more self-conscious than before. He overheard the messenger and teacher speaking. "It's as I was saying." This was the messenger. "The pupil needs to be good. Lord Gideon Clearsky believes the princess is becoming more flighty and irritable of late, and needs close supervision as well as guarding." Mrs. Yolland kept her voice down. "And what position does Lord Clearsky hold in the palace, that he may make an arrangement like this?" "He is the princess's betrothed. They are due to be wed soon." Drake wondered to himself if flighty and irritable were words he would much like a partner to use about him. He was also finding it hard not to watch the big feather in the messenger's hat wobble as their head moved, but he was brought to attention as he overheard his name. Mrs. Yolland had walked right up. "This is Drake. He is the finest swordsman in this school. He also happens to be my son." The messenger seemed hesitant. "Afraid that I'm showing a little nepotism?" Mrs. Yolland seemed amused. She addressed the room of final-year students. "If any of you fancy yourselves for this role, please prepare to duel my son. If you win, I will gladly put your name forward for Royal Guard instead." In the few short duels that followed this announcement, it became clear that Mrs. Yolland's endorsement of Drake was entirely deserved. Thoroughly impressed, the messenger arranged for Drake to be admitted to the palace to begin his role the very next morning. 3 weeks before our journey begins. Again. "Techo, is that you? Are you back?" "It's me, Ludwig." Ludwig completely filled the bed at the back of his little bedroom in Lowreal, even though it was custom built and huge. He did not turn his head to greet the tiny girl as she hopped up onto a stool next to him. It hurt too much to move. "Did you... I got it. I got you a cure." Ludwig breathed a sigh of relief as Techo carefully unwrapped a glass bottle full of viscous orange liquid from her bag. "Did it cost as much as the rumors said it would?" Ludwig asked. "Now isn't the time to worry about that." "Ugh, that bad?" Techo rested her forehead on Ludwig's chest. "They know they can charge what they want for this. I'm just glad we had enough saved. Not many people in Lowreal do." Techo decanted the cure into a glass, watching Ludwig as she did so. Ludwig had gotten worse. He had been struck down with what people were calling the blue decay, a magical disease, so named for its main symptom. Sufferers' fingertips turned blue before the wretched colour crept its way up the arms and legs, getting darker and knitting into the veins. Ludwig's hands were now almost black and shimmered as if white glitter speckled them. It was morbidly beautiful, organic magic without a caster. Techo now noticed that blue had snaked up from Ludwig's collar and into his cheeks. After 6 weeks of waiting anxiously for the cure salesman to travel this way, they were nearly out of time. "Drink this." Ludwig drank. "Oh, yuck. That is not pleasant." He winced at the taste, but smiled at Techo. All they could do now was wait. Techo stroked Ludwig's hands, but they were sweaty and cold. She moved to stroking him over his sleeves. "Get better, you big lug. How am I supposed to hunt bounties without you? If I take one shot and you're not around to heal me, I'm dead." "Is that all I am to you?" Ludwig grinned. "A livelihood." Techo laughed softly. She leaned forward in her stool and rested on Ludwig's stomach, taking care to face away from him, that she might not get too close and catch it. Only 4 feet tall to her best friend's towering 8, Ludwig barely felt her. 3 weeks before our journey begins. Now, you might be thinking, again, our journey should really have begun by now. But this is all very important stuff. Perhaps the journey has already begun. Antonia juggled with a mastery that would rivet kings and queens to their seats. She performed now to her crowd, sending 5 brilliantly coloured balls in every direction, so fast you could barely follow. With a light and practised ease, she stepped back, but the balls began to glow and continued to juggle themselves. Antonia waved her hands like a conductor. This was one of her favourite spells. There were a few gasps in the room, but a few of her patrons had seen her before, and a few chatted amongst themselves. Tough crowd. Suddenly, a voice called from the back of the hall. "It's time for birthday cake, everyone!" Catching all 5 balls again, Antonia bowed as the room full of children scrambled to their feet and towards the tables laid out with cake and ice cream. Only one child hesitated, coming up to Antonia. "Will you do another card trick on me, Antonia?" Antonia raised an eyebrow before placing a hand gently on the boy's head. "It would be my pleasure, young sir. But first, have some cake with your friends. Cake is very important for magic." Satisfied, the boy ran off, and Antonia took a seat next to a young woman sitting apart from the crowd. Antonia murmured to her, "I've been Antonia, the mystifying, the awe-inspiring, the creator of wide eyes and gasps alike." The woman chuckled. "I will say, don't you think Miss Birthday Cake is ready? Could have waited for your act to finish." "You know children's parties and their famously tight schedules," Antonia replied sarcastically. "But Maria, my dear sister, let's talk about you. Did you enjoy the show? How are you feeling now?" "You're the best performer in low reel, that's for sure. But perhaps I'm a little old for this stuff." "Nonsense! I am far older than you, and I'm not too old for this stuff." Maria rolled her eyes. There was no reasoning with Antonia. "It's nice of you to invite me to sit in while you work," she continued, "but I feel pretty awful. I can't shake this cold. I feel like I could fall asleep." "Then let me keep you awake, mon ami. Here, pick a card." Antonia shuffled a deck of cards, produced seemingly from nowhere, and fanned them out for her sister. Maria sighed, but took one sportingly. "Now, I want you to inspect it closely. Hold a picture of it in your mind. All done? Put it back in the deck for me, s'il te plaît." Antonia moved the cards expertly back and forth, creating spaces for Maria. She watched Maria's hand closely to see where she would choose, but suddenly... "Wait, Maria, stop." Antonia put her cards down on the table nearby and held Maria's hand up, inspecting it. "What?" Maria asked. "What's wrong?" She leaned in to see what Antonia was staring at, and her heart froze. Antonia's face had turned to stone. She didn't let go of her sister's hand. Maria's fingertips were starting to turn blue. Okay, and I'm also, okay, here's like the reading corner. I've let the fire run for a bit, and if you fell asleep, welcome back. No rest for you, because now I'm going to talk about it. Only briefly, but you know, this is for free, so you pay for it with this little afterwards bit. I haven't even prepared this one. I had the one about M, like, written down on a fic, like, and now I'm just gonna talk, like, out my ass right now, and you're gonna hear the clicking of the mouse and everything. It's not gonna be very sexy, but there we are, because I'm excited. Okay, so 3 weeks before our journey begins. Awesome, and we get to see, like, all the different characters on the same day, and we start with Lyra Cassiopeia, who, like, okay, like, no spoilers, but you've met all the characters now, so you can guess who Lyra Cassiopeia is. You can also guess by the fact that she opens with the thought, pissing boots. So, you know, like, let's get that in our heads. We open in the Stellarian kingdom, and then we actually move to a different location entirely with these various pictures. So the scene that you see with Drake in it is actually in a completely separate institution where they train swordsmen. And since I don't go into it in depth in this fic, because a lot of it happens downstairs, so to speak, and on the ground, I will tell you about it briefly now. It is an institution, I think it's just called, like, the school. It's called some shit like the school. And it is in a floating city called Mythicas, above the Stellarian capital city, which is also called Stellaria. And the only way to access Mythicas is a very treacherous pathway, actually up a mountain, directly to the north of the kingdom, of the city of Stellaria. So you fuck off up the path, and then the gateway into Mythicas is also very tightly guarded. So this is quite a gated community, and swordsmen here are drilled into the ground, and obviously Drake's own parents are the teachers here, so he has been drilled harder than most. If you're wondering how Mythicas is a floating city, it's one of those ancient, very powerful magic things. You know, they just kind of go with it, because we are talking about a civilization where currently things are stagnating, deteriorating slowly. Centuries and centuries ago, there was this sort of high amount of power, but now, while magic is still practiced, it's gate-kept, and that particular kingdom is slowly running itself into the ground. So it's interesting to see how people are acting in the face of this. And we also see in the next bit, where we're talking about Lowreal, that people of Lowreal, which is a tiny little town way south of all the rest of this gubbins happening, south of Altor, south of Stellaria, south of Mythicas, that it's also quite poverty-stricken. So not many people can afford this cure. And the last thing I'll talk about Antonia. I enjoy the characterization of Antonia as having similarly practiced skills throughout all of the universes. So she is equally good in this universe as she is in the court jester universe, where she is a world-renowned performer. But you can see in this universe, she can barely get a gig at a children's party. So what's that about? And it's just because of where you start in life, and where you're working yourself up to. So it's curious. I like to create different situations for my characters to be in. And I enjoy the Blue Decay as a narrative motivator to push people beyond their comfort zone to get, well, in this case, money is a big motivator, obviously. It will become clear why, but the cost for the cure of Blue Decay is nothing short of a criminal ransom. So luckily, Techo and Ludwig, with their background that obviously you know as trained wizards, can just about scrape this money together. A lot of people in Lowreal won't be able to. Antonia, not a chance. Now, I hope you've enjoyed me reading this. Excited to sort of just amble through to the next chapter. I am going to, it's 3:22 a.m. I'm going to put this in Premiere Pro, and then maybe I'm going to go to sleep. But have a very good evening, and if you're listening to this all together in a playlist, then I will see you in the next episode.